The water came in through the east wall first. Not the windows, not the door, but through the seam where the foundation met, the concrete block, a thin black line that widened in the time it took to understand what it was. Rowan Decker had been in the shelter for 11 minutes when he heard the woman in the back corridor. Not a scream. Something quieter than that, the kind of sound a person makes when they have decided not to panic. And the effort of that decision is audible. He found her wedged in the stairwell at the far end of the building, her left leg pinned under a collapsed section of metal shelving that had come down when the south wall shifted. She was conscious. She had her phone in her hand and was looking at it, with the expression of someone who already knew the answer. No signal. He had checked his own 12 minutes ago. He moved the shelving in 2 sections, the second piece taking both hands and a brace position he hadn't used since the job site in Galveston 4 years back. When the weight came off, she tested the leg herself before he could offer a hand. Methodical, pressing along the shin, and then the ankle the way someone does when they know what they're looking for. A bad sprain, maybe a hairline. She could bear weight on it if she had to. She had to. The shelter was a converted storm facility under the Mercer County Events Center, and it was filling, not quickly. But the math was not in their favor, and Rowan had done the math before she asked him to. He braced her left side. She took his arm, without ceremony, the grip of someone who has decided that pride is a luxury the current situation does not permit. They moved through the back corridor and up the secondary stairwell and out through the equipment bay door on the north side, which Rowan had propped with a length of pipe on his way in, on the theory that every exit deserves a backup plan. Outside, the rain was still coming. The parking lot was 4 inches deep and moving. He got her to his truck, which was parked on the elevated service drive behind the building. The only vehicle on that side. He had parked there because the ground sloped away from the building in the right direction, and because, after 18 years in civil infrastructure work, he had developed a habit of looking at the grade of things before he parked anywhere. He helped her into the passenger side, and she sat with her leg extended and looked at him when he came around to the driver's side and got in. "I don't know your name," she said. "Rowan." She nodded once. "Sloan." He started the truck. In his jacket pocket, folded against his phone, was the certified letter he had received that morning from Mercer County Municipal Court. The eviction filing. 3rd attempt. His landlord's attorney had finally found the provision they were looking for. He didn't think about it. He drove. 3 days after the flood at the Mercer County Events Center, Rowan was back on the site at the Kellerman Road drainage project, which had sustained moderate damage and needed a full reassessment of the culvert specifications before the county would authorize continued work. He wore a knee brace on his left leg from where he'd hit the shelving moving it. Nobody on the crew noticed. Or, if they did, they knew better than to mention it. A younger engineer named Santos was running calculations at the hood of the site truck when he mentioned that one of the people pulled from the shelter had been on the regional news the night before. Some kind of interview. Rowan handed him a set of survey stakes. "Check the elevation at marker 7. "Were you in there?" Santos asked. "Meek, take the transit." Santos took the transit. That evening, Rowan made dinner. Pasta with the last of the jarred sauce from the back of the cabinet, and a salad that was mostly carrots because he hadn't made it to the store. His son Eli sat at the table working on a history paper, his headphones around his neck rather than on his ears, which meant he was paying attention to 2 things at once in the way he always did. They ate without the television. It had been that way since Rowan moved them into the rental on Tulliver Street 2 years ago, after the divorce was finalized and the house in Cranston was sold. Not a rule. Just the way things had settled when it was the 2 of them. Mr. Abernathy said the shelter on 5th Street flooded, Eli said. He was 12, and he delivered most information with the flat precision of someone filing a report. Rowan said it had. "Were you near there?" Pass me the pepper. Eli passed the pepper and looked at his father's knee brace with the specific attention of a child who has learned that asking directly is less efficient than waiting. He picked up his fork and did not ask anything else. The letter from Hargrove Property Management was on the counter when Rowan came downstairs at 5 the next morning. Not a new one. The same one, which he had moved from the table to the counter the night before, so Eli wouldn't see it over breakfast. He read it again under the range light. 30 days had become 22 while he wasn't watching. His attorney, a patient man named Voss, who had been 3 years out of law school and was doing his best, had filed an objection to the acceleration of the timeline. The filing had been acknowledged. Acknowledged was not the same as granted. The provision Hargrove's attorneys were using was buried in the original lease agreement, a commercial conversion clause that had been inserted during the property's transition from residential to mixed use in 2019. Voss had identified it as potentially unenforceable under current county code, but potentially was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and Rowan had been around long enough to know the difference between a legal argument and a legal outcome. He folded the letter. He put it in the drawer with the survey maps and the utility invoices, and the other things that required attention he didn't currently have the capacity to give them. 4 floors up at Allegheny Regional Medical Center, on the morning of the 3rd day, a nurse named Deb came in to find her patient already sitting upright, with a legal pad on her tray table and a pen in her right hand. The left ankle was wrapped and elevated. The legal pad had 2 columns. Sloan Mercer had been unconscious for 6 hours after the rescue team reached her. A reaction to the cold and the blood pressure drop rather than any structural injury. The ankle was a grade 2 sprain, with a small avulsion fracture at the lateral malleolus. She would be non-weight-bearing for 6 weeks. "You have messages," Deb said. "I know." Sloan set down the pen. There was a man. The shelter, the back stairwell. He moved the shelving. Deb looked at the chart. He wasn't a first responder. Work boots, green jacket, no vest. He had a truck parked on the service drive. Most of the civilians who assisted were logged by the emergency management team when they came out. He didn't come through the main exit. Sloan's voice was even. "Find out who he is." Her deputy, a woman named Fran, who had worked with Sloan for 9 years and had learned to move quickly when Sloan's voice got that particular quality of calm, made 4 calls before noon. She contacted the county emergency management office, the events center facility manager, and the 2 officers who had coordinated the shelter evacuation. The 4th call was to a contact at the county assessor's office who had access to vehicle registration records, cross-referenced with the service drive security log. "His name is Rowan Decker," Fran said when she called back. "Civil engineer, licensed in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. He's been running the Kellerman Road drainage project for the county since March." Sloan was looking at the ceiling. Fran, 18 years in infrastructure. Before the county contract, he was senior project lead at Meridian Civil Group in Pittsburgh, large-scale flood mitigation systems. He designed the retention basin network that protected the Allegheny River corridor during the 2019 event. The one that, "I know which one." A pause. "He left Meridian in 2021. No press release, no disclosed reason. He's been on county contract work since then. Current rate is approximately $61 an hour, project basis." Outside the hospital window, the floodwater had begun to recede from the lower streets. The sandbags along the Commerce District were still visible, tan and irregular against the brick facades. Fran was still talking. Sloan held the phone and stopped tracking the words. She was thinking about the specific mechanics of how she had been moved through that stairwell. The angle of support, the placement of his grip, the way he had braced into the wall to transfer her weight without torquing her ankle further. She had noticed it at the time and filed it without comment, because the situation had not permitted comment. The man who had pulled her out of a flooding shelter had spent 18 years designing the exact systems that governed how water moved through structures under stress. He understood load paths and drainage rates, and the geometry of collapse. He had not guessed at any of it. He had known. "Send me everything," Sloane said. She hung up. 30 miles northeast, in a rental on Tulliver Street that sat on a flat lot behind a chain-link fence, Rowan spread the drainage survey maps across the kitchen table after Eli went to bed. He had been doing this for 3 weeks, not because the county required it, but because the original culvert's specifications were wrong in a way that mattered. And he was not the kind of person who could identify something that mattered and leave it alone. Along the margin of the primary watershed map, in his own handwriting, he had noted, Tulliver to Kellerman, 4.2% grade differential. Current pipe diameter insufficient for 50-year storm event. He had flagged it in the project report. The county engineer had acknowledged the flag. The budget amendment was under review. Under review was not the same as approved. He rolled the maps and put them in the tube. He did not think about the woman he had helped because he had assumed she was taken care of by the emergency teams. And there was nothing useful in thinking about people when you didn't know how they were and couldn't do anything about it either way. What he didn't know was that she was reading a file with his name on it 4 floors, up in a hospital building, 22 miles south. Sloane left the hospital on the 9th day. Her ankle was in a walking boot, and she moved with the careful deliberateness of someone managing discomfort they had categorized as manageable. Fran was waiting at the discharge bay with the car running and a coffee in the cup holder, and had already loaded Sloane's bag, because Fran had been doing this long enough to anticipate the sequence. "The office cleared your Thursday calendar," Fran said, pulling out. "Ray route north." Fran drove 2 blocks before she spoke. "How far north?" It wasn't a question. Mercer was 28 miles from the hospital. Tulliver Street was in the northeast section, past the grain elevator and the second traffic light, in the grid of streets that had been built when the county seat was still growing, and had stayed the same since it stopped. The rental on Tulliver was a narrow 2-story with a concrete stoop and a yard that had been mowed recently, and a chain-link gate that needed a new latch. Rowan was at the side of the house, replacing a section of fence post when the car pulled up. He heard the door and turned. He saw a woman he didn't recognize getting out of the passenger side, moving carefully on a booted ankle, and it took him a moment because he had last seen her in near dark in a flooding stairwell, and she had been in significantly worse condition. She crossed to the fence line and stopped. "Sloane Mercer," she said. "You moved the shelving." Not a question. Rowan set down the post driver. "I thought you'd been taken care of." "I was." She looked at him directly. "I wanted to know what you needed." He studied her, the boot. The way she was holding herself still in the November cold, with the specific posture of someone who has been in enough difficult situations to know that appearing steady matters. "Nothing," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the one I have." She looked past him at the house. Her eyes stopped on the notice taped to the front door, the one he'd meant to take down 4 days ago. At this distance, she couldn't read the text, but the Hargrove Property Management letterhead was visible at the top, blue and white. She recognized it. She didn't say anything about it. A sound from the side yard. A boy came around the corner of the house, carrying a length of PVC pipe and a hacksaw. He stopped when he saw the woman at the fence and looked at her without alarm. "You were on crutches," Eli said, "in the picture on the news." "I graduated to the boot," Sloane said. "My dad hurt his knee, but he didn't go to the doctor." He said it without accusation, the statement of someone documenting an established fact, and he glanced at Rowan with the mild expression of someone who has made this point before and expects it to land the same way it always does. Rowan looked at his son with the patience of a man who has accepted that certain arguments are not winnable. Something shifted in Sloane's expression. Not quite a smile, the shape of one. Rowan told her she didn't owe him anything. He said it the way he said things when he meant them, without inflection, without apology. And then he stepped back toward the house and let the screen door settle behind him. Sloane stood at the fence. Through the chain link she could see the notice on the door, could read the return address now, could see the date in the lower right corner. She stood there long enough that Fran got out of the car and waited beside her, which was something Fran had learned to do. Back in Pittsburgh, Sloane did not go to the office. She asked Fran to forward the Hargrove property management filings and the county court records to her home laptop. She ordered food she didn't finish and read documents until after midnight. "What are you doing?" Fran asked when she called somewhere past 10. "Reading a lease agreement." A pause. "The conversion clause," Sloane said. "Hargrove has used it 11 times in the last 14 months. 8 of them are on Tulliver Street or within 2 blocks." She scrolled to the next document. They acquired 3 adjacent parcels last year through a shell entity registered in Delaware. There's a rezoning application pending with the county planning board. Mixed-use commercial. The corridor they want runs directly through that block. Fran was quiet. "They're not collecting rent," Sloane said. "They're clearing the land." "You already knew that," Fran said. Sloane didn't answer, which meant she had known it before she started reading, and Fran understood the distinction between confirming something and deciding what to do about it. "He saved your life," Fran said. "This has nothing to do with that." Fran said nothing to that, either, which meant she disagreed and had decided it wasn't the moment to say so. 20 miles northeast. That same afternoon, Rowan had sat across a desk from a man named Cresswell at the Hargrove regional office for 18 minutes. Cresswell was polished in the way of people who have learned to make bad news sound like a service. He walked through the voluntary departure agreement with the patience of someone who expects the other person to be grateful for the clarity. Rowan could sign, vacate within 30 days, and the outstanding balance from the disputed late fees would be waived as a gesture of good faith. He smiled when he said gesture of good faith. Rowan sat still through all of it. He listened. He thanked Cresswell for his time and stood up. He drove to the Kellerman Road site and sat in the truck for a while, looking at the drainage work his crew had completed that week. The culvert at the eastern end was right. The pipe diameter was still wrong at the western junction, but it was right where it needed to be most. He looked at his phone. He had written Sloane Mercer's number on the back of a receipt and put it in the center console the day she left. He had not looked at it since. He took it out now and looked at it. Then he put it back. His phone rang. Chicago area code, but the specific exchange was Pittsburgh. He looked at it for 2 rings. "Do you have a copy of your original lease agreement?" Sloane said when he answered. He said he did. Page 11. Section 4C. The Commercial Conversion Clause. Her voice had the evenness of someone reading from a document they have already memorized. The clause is only enforceable if Hargrove can demonstrate that the property was actively marketed as commercial within 18 months of the original lease date. They can't. The zoning application wasn't filed until 2022. Your lease is from 2021. 4 seconds of silence. "How do you know the filing date?" he said. The line went quiet. Then it disconnected. The second time Sloane came to Tulliver Street, she didn't call ahead. She drove herself, boot on the accelerator, coffee in the cup holder, and parked in front of the house at 7 on a Wednesday evening. Through the front window, she could see 2 people at the kitchen table. Rowan was pointing at something on a large sheet of paper. Eli was beside him, following with his finger, his chin slightly forward in the way of someone working out a problem. Survey maps, Sloane saw when she got closer to the porch. The Kellerman Road watershed system, red annotations in the margins. She knocked, sued, crouched. Rowan came to the door and looked at her with the expression of a man who is not surprised but hasn't decided what to do with that. He opened the door and stepped back. He sent Eli upstairs with the easy authority of someone who has never needed to negotiate it. Eli went, but not before giving Sloane a look that was not suspicious, not particularly curious, more the look of someone who has already formed a theory and is watching it confirm. Sloane spread the documents on the kitchen table. The Hargrove filings, the county planning records, the parcel maps for the Tulliver corridor, and the 3 adjacent blocks. Rowan stood across from her and read them without touching them, his eyes moving in the way engineers read complex documents, finding the structural elements first. He straightened. "They want the land use designation," he said, "not the rent. The rent is a mechanism." He looked at the parcel map. The conversion clause is the same thing. It's not enforcement, it's pressure. They're not trying to collect, they're trying to make people leave, so the rezoning goes through without opposition. He looked at her. 11 households. 8 on this corridor, 3 adjacent. You came here to tell me something I already worked out. I came here to ask whether you want me to buy the property management company. He was quiet for a long time. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. The sodium light on the corner was out again, had been for 2 weeks, and the block was darker than it should have been. He had filed a request with the city utilities department. Acknowledged, not resolved. "I don't want to be handled," he said. "This isn't about you." She said it without edge, clearly. The silence that followed lasted long enough for both of them to understand that what she'd said was not entirely true. That she knew it, and he knew it, and that neither of them was going to say so out loud. He told her she should go before Eli came back down for his evening reading. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. Sloane gathered the documents. One slipped from the stack and went flat on the floor. They both reached for it at the same time, and he handed it back, and their hands did not touch, but the distance was less than it had been at any point in the conversation. She walked to the car. She sat without starting the engine. Her phone lit up. Fran. "The Hargrove portfolio assessment came back," Fran said. "The parent entity is acquirable. The residential holdings are clean. The commercial development arm is where the exposure is, and that's manageable under a standard restructuring agreement." Sloane was watching the light in the upstairs window, the shadow of Eli's movement behind the curtain. "How fast can you move?" she said. There was a document Fran set on the conference table 3 weeks into the acquisition process that she had not been asked to find. She set it without comment and stood at the edge of the table and waited, which was what she did when the information was significant enough to need its own space. Crouched, Sloane pulled it over and read it. It was a Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection internal report from 2021, a review of the flood mitigation assessment for the Euphiogenny River watershed project, a $47 million infrastructure initiative that Meridian Civil Group had submitted the primary engineering plan for. The plan had a flaw, not a small one. The retention basin network Meridian had proposed would have protected the commercial corridor in the lower watershed, but redirected peak storm flow into 3 residential neighborhoods upstream. 1,400 homes. The communities affected were predominantly working class, predominantly older housing stock, the kind of neighborhoods that don't have engineers on retainer to review the documents. One engineer at Meridian had identified the issue and filed a formal objection. He had requested a full hydraulic reanalysis before the plan went to DEP for approval. He had put the objection in writing. It had been reviewed by 2 senior partners and declined on the grounds that the reanalysis would delay the project timeline by 4 months, and the client had penalty clauses for late delivery. Crouched. The engineer had resigned the week the plan was submitted. His name was on the objection memo. Sloane sat with the document for a long time. The plan had ultimately been rejected by DEEP on different grounds, a permitting issue unrelated to the hydraulic flaw. The neighborhoods upstream had never been at risk in the end, not because Meridian had corrected the error, but because a permitting technicality had stopped the project before it could do what it had been designed to do. Rowan had known what the plan would do. He had said so in writing. He had resigned when they filed it anyway. She looked at the document, then at the window. Chicago moved through its November outside, indifferent and continuous. He could file a professional liability complaint against Meridian. He could take it to DEP directly, flag the suppressed objection, document the pattern. The exposure for the firm would be significant. He knew that. He had known it since the day he resigned. He had chosen not to. Fran appeared in the doorway. She looked at Sloane, and then at the document, and said nothing for a moment. "When you move on Hargrove," she said finally, "make sure you know why you're doing it." She left. Sloane didn't answer. She was still looking at the window, and she didn't have an honest answer to give. That night on Kellerman Road, Rowan completed his inspection of the western culvert junction by headlamp, the work the county hadn't budgeted for, and he was doing anyway, because the pipe diameter was wrong, and he was not capable of leaving something wrong when he knew how to fix it. He worked through the assessment in order, the way he always did. When he reached the drainage calculation for the 50-year storm scenario, he paused. He ran the numbers again, not because he doubted them, because the quality of the attention he gave this particular calculation was the one thing in the current situation that was entirely his to control. The hangar, the tunnel, the stairwell in the dark, the geometry of how a body moves through a confined space under load. He had always understood those things. He had not always been able to do anything useful with them. He packed up the equipment and drove home. Cresswell found out about the acquisition inquiry through a contact at the county planning board, someone who monitored commercial transactions in the Mercer corridor and had learned to make a call when the situation warranted it. He didn't have a name. He had enough. He moved on a Friday. He pulled the conversion clause enforcement on 4 accounts simultaneously, including Tulliver Street, reducing the notice period from 30 days to 10. It was within the technical terms of the original lease agreement, if you read the emergency provision clause in isolation, and did not look at the verbal assurances documented in the move-in correspondence from 2021, which constituted a good faith modification under Pennsylvania tenant law. The notice arrived on a Tuesday morning. Rowan read it at the kitchen table before Eli came downstairs. He folded it. He sat for a moment. Then he got in the truck. He drove to the Hargrove regional office and walked past the front desk and down the hall to the office at the back and opened the door without knocking. Cresswell was on a call. He looked up and held up one finger. Rowan waited. Cresswell finished the call and set the phone down with the expression of a man who intends to manage whatever is about to happen. Rowan placed 2 pieces of paper on the desk. The new 10-day notice on the left, a printed copy of the move-in correspondence from 2021 on the right, the email chain where Cresswell's predecessor had confirmed in writing that the commercial conversion clause would not be invoked during the original lease term without a minimum of 60 days' notice. "That's a binding modification," Rowan said. "You know that." Cresswell looked at the papers. "I'm not here to argue about it," Rowan said. "I'm here so there's a record of this conversation." His voice was completely level, the voice of someone who has had this conversation in different rooms, with different men who all had the same expression. Cresswell reached for his desk phone. Rowan didn't move. He stood still and looked at Cresswell, with the patience of someone who has decided that what happens next is not the most important thing. "You know what I've noticed about this kind of situation," Rowan said. "The people who need me to leave have spent a lot of effort making sure I don't have anywhere else to go." He paused once. "That's not actually leverage, that's just pressure. And pressure and leverage are different things." He left. He sat in the truck in the parking lot and looked at his phone. He had the receipt with Sloane's number in the center console. He didn't take it out. He didn't have to. He dialed from memory. She answered on the first ring. "What are you doing with the property company?" he said. "Acquiring it." A pause. 3 seconds. The kind where the question is not what to say, but how much of the true answer to put into it. "It's wrong," she said. "What they're doing is wrong." "That's not the only reason." She didn't say anything. She didn't deny it. He looked through the windshield at the Hargrove building, at the logo above the entrance, at the customer service number in white lettering beneath it. "I'm not going to tell you not to," he said. That afternoon, Eli came home from school and went looking for his father. He found him on the front stoop, forearms on his knees, watching the street. Eli sat down beside him. His hand found the edge of his father's knee brace, the neoprene warm from the day. He didn't ask about it. Neither of them said anything. The light moved across the street, and the neighborhood went amber, and then the street light on the corner, the one that had been out for 2 weeks, came on. Someone had finally fixed it. Sloan's firm completed the acquisition of Hargrove Property Management in 17 days. The Pennsylvania Real Estate Authority had processed faster deals, but not many. Fran had on approximately 4 hours of sleep for the final 10 days of it, and had the particular look of someone who has done an unreasonable thing in a reasonable amount of time. There was no press availability. Sloan was in Mercer. She drove herself. The boot was off. The ankle was functional. She parked on Tulliver Street in front of the house at 8 in the morning and waited near the chain-link gate. Rowan came out at 8:20 with a thermos and a rolled survey map under his arm. He saw her and stopped. She held out an envelope. He took it without opening it. "It's not a lease modification," she said. "It's not anything to do with the house." He waited. "No. The DP suppression memo," she said. "The objection you filed at Meridian in 2021. I forwarded it to the Pennsylvania State Ethics Commission and to the DP's Office of Inspector General with a formal request for a regulatory review of how Hugh Meridian's partners handled the hydraulic flaw disclosure." She met his eyes. "I also sent it to the 2 state senators who sit on the Environmental Infrastructure Oversight Committee." His face didn't change. "I didn't ask you," she said. "I'm telling you because you should know. You didn't have to do that." "Ouched, I know." He held the envelope. The wind off the fields moved between them. He looked at her. Not the way he had looked at her in the stairwell, not the way he had looked at her across the kitchen table. The way a person looks at someone when they have run out of reasons not to. He saw the fine scar along her hairline where she had hit the shelving. He saw that she was standing straight in the cold, with the practiced stillness of someone who has been in enough hard rooms to know that posture is a form of honesty. "The deep will want documentation," she said. "The original objection memo, the submission timeline, the internal response. You'll want someone in your corner for that conversation." He nodded once. She turned to go. "You didn't ask me," he said. "No," she stopped. "I didn't." The new management of Hargrove Property Management, in its first week of operation, initiated a portfolio-wide audit of all lease agreements where the commercial conversion clause had been invoked in the preceding 24 months. Fran had structured the review as a standard corrective compliance process, applied uniformly across all affected accounts without reference to any individual tenant by name. Rowan's lease modification was the first one confirmed under the corrected terms. He didn't say anything when the letter came. He read it at the kitchen table, set it down, and got up to start the coffee. Luched. Eli came downstairs at 7 and saw the letter on the table. He read the first paragraph. He looked at his father's back. He set the letter down and didn't read further, because he had understood the part that mattered, and the part that mattered didn't need more words. Rowan called Sloan that evening at 9. He had called her once before, from the Hargrove parking lot, and that call had been about a specific thing. This one was different, and he understood it was different before he dialed. She answered. Your ankle, he said. How is it? Functional. Physical therapy finished last week. Good. He looked at the survey maps still on the kitchen table. I didn't ask about the ankle. A silence. Not the silence of someone who hadn't heard, the silence of someone deciding. I know, she said. The call lasted 26 minutes. There was no record of what was said, and any accounting of it would have been incomplete anyway, because it was the first conversation they had had that had no subject other than itself. It was simply two people talking past the hour when most things of consequence get said. One of them standing at a window in Pittsburgh, watching the river bridge lights reflect in the water. The other sitting at a kitchen table in Mercer, with the county maps still spread out and a pencil he hadn't used yet sitting on top of them. Both of them knew what the call was. Neither of them named it. 3 weeks after the acquisition closed, Cresswell submitted his resignation. The board accepted it without comment. A week later, a brief item ran in the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, noting that the Pennsylvania State Ethics Commission had opened a preliminary inquiry into the handling of engineering disclosure requirements on the Yohiogheny watershed project, and that the inquiry had been referred jointly by the DEP's Oversight Office and 2 members of the state legislature. Meridian Civil Group's name appeared in the 3rd paragraph. Rowan received a letter from the DEP's Office of Inspector General on a Thursday. He read it at the kitchen table and set it down and poured another cup of coffee. Eli came downstairs, saw the letterhead, looked at his father. Rowan was at the counter. His back was to the room. Eli read the first 2 lines. He set the letter down. He understood that something had been returned to his father that had been taken a long time ago, and that his father was not going to say anything about it, and that not saying anything about it was probably the right response. He poured himself juice and sat down. Neither of them said anything, which was how they handled the things that actually mattered. Rowan called Sloane that evening. He had not planned what to say. He knew only that the other times he had called, there had been a reason, a document, a timeline, a question with an answer. This time there wasn't. That was the point of it. She answered. He told her about the DP letter. She already knew. Fran had been copied on the referral. He had expected that. Voss wants to talk to you, he said, his attorney, about the Meridian filing. Tell him to call Fran. I will. A pause. I wanted to ask you something. She waited. The spring assessments on the Kellerman Road watershed start in March, he said. The county's bringing in an independent review panel for the culvert specifications. It would be useful to have someone on that panel who understands the development pressure side of the drainage question. The way commercial rezoning affects runoff load. Silence. That's not what you wanted to ask me, Sloane said. He looked at the kitchen table. The survey maps. The pencil still uncapped where he'd left it. No, he said, it isn't. She was quiet for a moment. I'm coming to Mercer on Saturday, she said. I don't have a reason. You don't need one. She came on Saturday. She parked on Tulliver Street and walked to the door and knocked, and Rowan opened it with the unhurried movement of someone who has been waiting without making a production of it. Eli was on the front with a piece of scrap wood and a carving knife, working on something that was starting to look like a fish. He looked up when Sloane came through the gate and raised 2 fingers in the wave of someone greeting a person they have long since finished evaluating. He went back to the fish. Rowan walked her through the house and out the back. He hadn't done that before, brought her to this part of the lot. And there was nothing he needed to show her here, except the thing that was actually there. He opened the back door. She followed him onto the porch. Below them, the valley was still. The fields ran out flat to the east, and then the land rose in long, slow ridges toward the Pennsylvania border. The drainage basin he had redesigned was visible in the middle distance. The retention geometry clear from this elevation, the way water would move through it in a storm year, the paths it would take, the houses it would not touch. He didn't explain it. She didn't ask. On the porch rail, she saw a sheet of drafting paper weighted at the corners with washers, a site plan, the lot, the house, the back porch drawn to scale. Along the eastern wall of the house, in pencil, a new notation she hadn't seen before. An addition, small, measured, a room with a south-facing window, the dimensions written in his handwriting in the margin. She looked at it for a while. Then she looked at him. He was watching the valley. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She looked at the screen. Fran. She looked at it for 2 full seconds. Then she turned the screen face down on the rail beside the drawings. Rowan had seen. He said nothing. He pulled the second chair from against the porch wall and set it next to the drawings. The legs, settling evenly on the weathered boards. The back door opened. Eli came through with 2 mugs and a smaller one for himself, and set the 2 larger ones on the rail without being asked. He settled on the steps with his own mug and the scrap wood and took up the carving knife. Nobody asked him to sit somewhere else. The valley light shifted, long and lateral, the way it does in late winter when the angle is still low, but the days are starting to hold. The drainage basin caught the sun at the far end and held it for a moment before the clouds moved. The fish in Eli's hands was almost finished. Rowan Decker had not pulled Sloane Mercer from a flooding stairwell because he knew who she was. Sloane Mercer had not acquired a property company because she owed him a debt. What happened afterward, in the porch light with the valley going gold, and the sound of a 12-year-old's knife finding the shape of something small and nearly done, had no name in any lease agreement or acquisition filing or drainage specification either of them had ever written. It was just what it was, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Couched. I keep thinking about the moment Rowan parked on that elevated service drive. Not the rescue itself, the parking. He chose that spot because he understood how water moves across a graded surface, and that understanding, built over 18 years of quiet, unglamorous work, is what made everything else possible. Nobody handed him that knowledge. He built it through years of showing up, reading the grade of things before he sat down, caring about drainage specifications that nobody else was losing sleep over. That kind of integrity doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, invisible, until the moment it's the only thing standing between a flooding stairwell and a worse outcome. I think about that when I hear people talk about doing the right thing, like it's a single dramatic decision. It isn't. It's 10,000 small ones. Rowan filed the objection at Meridian in writing, knowing they'd decline it, knowing he'd probably have to walk away from a career he'd spent nearly 2 decades building. He did it anyway, not because it guaranteed anything good for him. It didn't, but because the alternative was signing his name to something he knew was wrong. That's not heroism in the movie sense. That's just a person deciding, very quietly, who they are. And then there's Sloane. What I find remarkable about her is that she didn't mistake information for understanding. She had the full file on Rowan before she ever drove to Tulliver Street, the patent, the Boeing objection, the DEP memo, all of it. But she didn't lead with any of that. She showed up, looked at the situation plainly, and asked what he needed. When he said nothing, she didn't push. She went home and read the documents until midnight, not because she owed him something, but because she is the kind of person who, once she understands that something is wrong, cannot unfind that knowledge. That's a form of moral seriousness that I don't think gets talked about enough. The willingness to see something clearly and then act on what you've seen, even when no one is asking you to. What strikes me most about both of them is that neither one collapsed under pressure that would have broken a lot of people. Rowan got served a 10-day notice and drove to the Hargrove office and placed 2 pieces of paper on a desk and explained, calmly and without theater, why the clause was unenforceable. He didn't perform anger. He didn't beg. He was simply someone who had done his homework, knew his position, and refused to be smaller than the situation required. That takes something that I think gets underestimated, not just courage, but the kind of clear-eyed steadiness that comes from knowing exactly what you stand on. I don't think what happened between them was fate in any mystical sense. I think it was the natural result of two people who had each, separately, decided to be the kind of person who does the hard thing when it costs something. People like that tend to recognize each other. And when they do, something becomes possible that wasn't before. I don't know what Eli made of all of it, exactly. But I think about him setting 3 mugs on the porch rail without being asked, and going back to his carving without explanation, and I think he understood more than anyone gave him credit for. Kids usually do, when the adults around them are trying to be honest.